How's it going, everybody? This is Dominic Minchella. I am the Kansas City Chiefs co-beat writer for On SI and the host of the Kansas City Chiefs Insider Podcast. Thank you guys so much for stopping in today. If you made sure that you tuned in yesterday's podcast, we touched on the difficulties or early concerns within the Chiefs wide receiving room. If you didn't have a chance to check out that podcast, I advise you to go check it out because it kind of stems off of yesterday's podcast, asking an early question on whether or not there should be concern on the defensive side of the football for the Kansas City Chiefs following the first week performance. Now, as you guys know, the Chiefs did lose to the Los Angeles Chargers in week 1 by the score of 27-21. And while it may seem like it was not that big of a deal, not that big of a loss, there is a trend that has happened more recently for the Kansas City Chiefs that they haven't been able to shake on the defensive side of the ball, and that has been limiting scoring. Now, you might remember last season there was a lot of discussion almost by every analyst and within the NFL surrounding around how the Kansas City Chiefs held on to one-score games flawlessly last season. This year, obviously, off to the start that they are, it's not likely that they are going to be winners in hold down one-score games as we've seen last year. However, going forward, though, it's the defense that made the Chiefs as successful in that category as they were last season, holding in those one-score games, that is. This year, though, and from what we've seen from the last few games in the playoffs and in the preseason, the Chiefs have kind of struggled on the defensive side of the ball. It could raise some concerns. Here's some statistics for you, for instance. Now, last season, the Kansas City Chiefs defense allowed 20 or more points in the regular season for 6 different times in the regular season. Now, after their last allowing 20 or more points, which was to the Carolina Panthers, they won in week 12 by the score of 30-27. The Kansas City Chiefs defense from week 13 until the end of the season, rather, where they weren't really competitive against the Denver Broncos, held their opponents to 20 or few lower points, which is impressive. That's how you win games. Defense wins games. Then you go into their playoff pursuit. They went up against the Houston Texans, and they won that game 23-14. Another great performance for the defense, holding the Texans to 2 scores. Then you kind of look at how things turned against Buffalo, and then as we also know, against the Philadelphia Eagles, it didn't go their way. Buffalo scored 29 points against the Chiefs defense, and the Chiefs held on for a 32-29 victory in the conference championship game last year. They got beaten 40-22 in a defensive hiccup game for the Super Bowl against the Philadelphia Eagles. Then you go into the preseason games, and I've touched on this several times. We understand that the preseason games, they don't count, or some people view them as not counting. But these are the kind of tidbits that could give you an indication of whether or not this area will be successful or not for the regular season. And I say that because they haven't not allowed 20 or more points at all since the turn of the calendar. Since that Buffalo game, there's been 20 or more points scored against the Kansas City Chiefs defense going into week 2 against the Eagles at Arrowhead. Against the Arizona Cardinals, as we know, they lost 20-17. There's 20 points. You've got 33 points led up to the Seattle Seahawks in their second preseason game. 29 points against the Chicago Bears in the third preseason game, and then dating into the 27-21 loss to the Los Angeles Chargers. Now, I understand that the whole motive of this podcast, of me telling you this, is that there is a trend that is going that way, where the Kansas City Chiefs defense kind of needs to step up and hold their opposing offense to several points less in order to win, especially now because the wide receiving room for the Kansas City Chiefs is a little spotty with day-to-day or week-to-week progression of injury for Xavier Worthy after dislocating his shoulder in the first week, as well as without Rashee Rice for the first 6 weeks. There's a lot of wide receiving errors or holes that they're missing now going into a very important stretch of the season. We know that the Kansas City Chiefs' first 9 weeks of the campaign is going to be a tad concerning because they have such a difficult schedule. If they are able, though, to have a defense that holds themselves away and off and allows their offense, whether that be a one-scoring offense lead that we saw a lot last year or a dominating form that we've seen 2 or 3 years ago, that's how these teams are going to win games. You got to keep in mind, though, that there hasn't been a whole lot of turnover for the Kansas City Chiefs this season when it comes to the defensive side of the ball. Now, I understand that you lost Justin Reid, and his presence was missed on in the first week competition. But dating back to 2024, this Kansas City Chiefs team averaged holding a team to around 320.6 net yards allowed. The defense was strong. We saw it in the last few games, like I noted to begin the podcast. The last few games from week 13 on, the highest scoring besides the Denver game where they lost 38-0 was 19 points to the Houston Texans. That is the way that this Kansas City Chiefs team is going to be able to win early. Should there be concern because they let up a few extra points in the first week against the Chargers? No, I don't think that there should be a concern. I think that the Chiefs defense has enough going for it to be able to work with the errors that happened in the first week to consistently produce for their franchise going forward. Going into week 2, if the Kansas City Chiefs defense does struggle once again against the Philadelphia Eagles, it could raise some eyebrows, especially depending on how the score lays out. But guys like George Karlaftis, Chris Jones, Drew Tranquill, Nick Bolton, the veterans on that staff are going to have to be able to step up and kind of play the game of football. At the end of the day, you don't want to go out there and try so hard that you are forcing your hand, and if things go wrong, then they go terribly wrong. These guys know how to play the game. They know how the defensive standpoint is. They still have defensive coordinator Steve Spagnuolo, who has a great track record. And going into week 2, if the defense is able to adjust and hold the Philadelphia Eagles offense to less than 20 points, which will be a struggle in itself, just given how the Eagles offense is laid out, then I don't think there will be any concern for the defensive side of the football in Kansas City. But if the offense isn't doing their job and the defense does hold the Eagles to within a winnable margin for the Kansas City Chiefs, I do think that there should not be fingers pointed at either the offensive side or the defensive side of the football. I do think, though, that there needs to be some cohesiveness within that locker room, being able to go into the first 9 weeks of the season. Starting off 0-2, losing to both the Chargers and the Eagles would not fare well for the Kansas City Chiefs. So I'm expecting the defensive side of the football to kind of step up and be a driving force of victory should the Chiefs land that victory in week 2. If they're going to win, it's going to be on the defensive side of the ball, and I do think that they have the players to do so. That being said, though, ladies and gentlemen, as always, be sure you follow me over on X at Dom Minchella. I post and repost every single day. You're not going to want to miss any coverage that I got for you as we prolong into the regular season covering the Kansas City Chiefs. You could also follow us at KC Chiefs on SI over on X, where all of our stories get published exclusively free for you, the viewers. Kansas City Chiefs on SI is the place to get your Kansas City Chiefs news, podcast, and analysis. Can't wait to see you there. As always, I'm Dominic Minchella. Be kind to one another, and I'll see you tomorrow.